Վերջերս Նյու Յորքի Սուրբ Վարդան Մայր տաճարի Krikor եւ Clara Zohrab տեղեկատվական կենտրոնի կողմից կազմակերպված էր մի գողտրիկ ձեռնարկ։ Ձեռնարկին հրավիրված էր Կալիֆոռնիայի ժամանած Dr.Rosemary Hartounian Cohen-ը ներկայացնելու իր The Survivor վերապրածը գիրքը։ Dr. Rosemary Hartounian Cohen-ը, որը գաղթել է Թեհրանից, ուսում ստացել Փարիզի Սորբոնի համալսարանում, գրքեր սկսել է գրել իր աղջկա ողբերգական մահից հետո։ Նրա մեջ կարծես իր արմատներին վերադառնալու պահանջը առաջացել եւ գրել է 6 գիրք անգլերենով, որոնք թարգմանվել են հայերեն եւ պարսկերեն։ Այս The Survivor գիրքը ներկայացնում է 1914-18 թվականների Khoy գավառում կոտորածները։ Երեկոն բացման խոսքով սկսեց Zohrab կենտրոնի տնօրեն վարդապետ դոկտոր Դանիել Ֆնդիկյանը։
We are delighted to have with us this evening Rosemary Hartounian Cohen, who will present her fairly recent memoir called The Survivor. And I met Dr. Cohen, well, maybe a year or two ago, a pleasant conversation we had in a visit at the Zohrab Center, and I learned myself that we Armenians have been the subjects or the victims of a genocide, of course, and then another genocide, lesser known. One could argue whether it was an extension of one tragedy or whether it was really another assault on the Armenians, again by the Ottoman Turks, this one in the year 1918, and this one quite a bit farther east from the traditional historical lands that we refer to as historical Armenia or Western Armenia. This time in the northwestern corner of Iran, in a city called Khoy, sometimes in Armenia referred to as Her, which for centuries had been occupied by a very vibrant and large Armenian community. And in the year 1918, quite suddenly, in a story, the plot line of which we've become very familiar, the Ottoman Turks came through and they massacred all of the Armenians that were there. Very few survived. One of the survivors was Dr. Hartounian Cohen's grandmother. And the survivor is the account of her life. So yet another genocide memoir of which those that have been with us in the past few months have heard several. This one with a somewhat different circumstances. Rosemary Hartounian Cohen is an award-winning author, journalist, and accomplished artist. She is the author, in addition to the survivor, of a number of other historical novels, several of which Dr. Cohen has brought with her and are available for you to purchase. Dr. Cohen received her doctorate in sociology from the Sorbonne in Paris and is the founder and director of the Liana Cohen Foundation. This is a marvelous non-profit organization that promotes music and art to support grieving families and survivors of all kinds of violence and tragedy. And I learned by doing a little bit of research that Liana is the late daughter of Dr. Cohen, who was a victim of, sadly, of violence and tragedy. And I learned that much of Dr. Cohen's work with this nonprofit organization, but also in some of her writings, is very much inspired by the memory of her beautiful daughter, Liana. And she told me that if we ask her, she might say a few more words at the end of her presentation about the good work of this organization.
This lecture is dedicated to the memory of the martyrs that we commemorate the centenary this year. And at the same time, we are here to celebrate the life of the Armenians of today. I would like to ask you to excuse me to read from my notes because this is a very emotional subject that is very close to my heart and soul. I am sure that if I speak about this subject 1.5 million times, it will still hurt me deeply. Tonight, I'm not going to read from my book, The Survivor, which has been translated into Persian, published in Iran, going to its 3rd edition, to Eastern Armenian, published in Yerevan University, at Yerevan University in Western Armenian, published by the Prelacy of Tehran, and in Turkish by Liko Publishing. The French version is being published in Paris. The English survivor is written in a very simple language so that everyone can read it. I have been told many times that once they start reading the book, they do not want to put it down until the last sentence is read. As I never saw my grandfather, we don't have a photo of him to at least see how he looked. We didn't even have a grave to visit. I didn't have any uncles, cousins, or aunts, or many close or far relatives. Our relatives consisted of 3 individuals: my grandmother's younger sister and her 2 brothers, who stayed alive because they were in Russia in 1918. Naturally, they became my own aunt and uncles, and their children, my cousins. Yes, you are guessing right. Who else can it be? It's because of the Ottoman government's orders that all our family members and the entire Armenian and Assyrians who for centuries lived in the northwest of Persia, Iran, were killed in 1918. But by the will of God, my 3-year-old mother and 18-year-old grandmother were saved so that I can be here today and tell you, everyone, their story. My grandmother Arsiak, a delicate-looking, soft-speaking woman, was as strong as the Armenian survivor women were supposed to be. She never complained, never asked for any favors, never cried, but she never laughed like other women of her age either. She always had a sweet smile on her face. She was peaceful and helpful and offered unconditional love. She looked like a queen whose crown was stolen by evil, but God's glory and light enveloped her being instead. This is how most of the survivors looked, because they have experienced hell, but later they have been pushed towards heaven. The tradition and the education of the time was to separate the adults' world from the children, as the parents wanted their young ones to live in the happy childhood kingdom. So I was kept away from all the past family stories. But children are wise and curious. They discover secrets very fast. The question that I used to ask myself were, why didn't I have a grandfather? Why my grandmother and mother always wore black and dark-colored dresses? Why my grandmother's few friends were all widows? Why didn't I have uncles and relatives like most of my friends and neighbors? But the relationship in our house was built on respect and silence. Somehow, I knew that if I asked questions, I will cause pain to my grandmother. And I loved her very much, so I respected the silence. That was her protective shell. Even though no one told me anything about the massacre, I kept seeing visions of war, especially every time that I developed fever and my fever spiked. I would begin seeing images of soldiers plucking children away from their mothers on the walnut armored door in the bedroom. I would cry and scream, "Help them, help them." My mother would rush in with a cold compress for my head. As the time passed, I learned to penetrate my grandmother's small circle, take advantage of her short absences, and ask questions from the talkative ones. Later, I learned that she was not only protecting me from the cruel truth, but that she was trying to not poison my young spirit, so that I would not learn to hate or discriminate others, even the Turks. She had seen good and evil in everyone, every group. She understood that personal goodness and peace were more important in life. In time, I learned that I did not have the power to forgive. Forgiveness is a profound word that needs a deeper knowledge and action. Only God knows the truth in everyone, and He is the only one who can forgive, not I. Who am I? A handful of dust. But in order to function well in this world, I had to go over the tragedies and bad events. Certainly, I did not have the right to forget them either. Later, I asked more questions, but it was very hard to pull words out of the closed mouths of the survivors. But I tried. I was patient and never gave up. Yes, we have to remember the past. For me, writing was the only way that I could pay back all the sufferings and goodness of my grandmother and mother. In order to keep their memories alive, I had to tell their story. It was painful to write, as I had to live all the events again with them. While writing, I felt the ache in my heart and tears in my eyes. I lived with them and I went through their hell, but I lost them again. As we didn't have any pictures, I decided to make a small family album. So I painted 12 oil paintings. This time my fingers ached, but my paintings solved the past unknown psychological fears and problems that my mother had carried for over 80 years. When I wrote the book, I could relate well to my grandmother's pain, as in 1992, my 18-year-old daughter, Liana, was killed by a drunk driver 25 hours before her flight to Boston to start her first year of college. My grandmother was 18 years old, too, when her loving husband was killed in front of her and her 3-year-old daughter. In that same day, the entire members of her family were massacred, and her house and all their belongings were stolen. And this happened around June 18, 1918. Persia had declared its neutrality in the World War conflict. But in 1918, the Ottoman army crossed the border lines of their neighboring country, entered in the city of Khoy, and killed the entire Armenian population, who were Iranian citizens who had lived peacefully with their Muslim neighbors for centuries. What is the word for this action? Don't you call this genocide? Young Armenian and Christian boys over the age of 10 years old and the men were killed savagely. The Ottoman army had posted that if they find any Armenians hiding in a Muslim house, the entire Muslim family would be killed and their houses destroyed. Hakim Eftekhar, who hid my grandparents and mother in his house, had also protected other Armenians. Many Iranian Muslims had done the same, regardless of the immediate danger that existed for their families. In the last day of their occupation, the Ottoman army found my grandfather. They killed him in front of his young wife and daughter, bound his legs to the tail of their horse, and dragged his body in the streets. So the streets of Khoy became the graveyard of my grandfather. Besides Khoy, the Ottoman soldiers continued and repeated their cruel acts in the cities of Baku, Qaradagh, Salmas, Urmia, and in many surrounding Christian villages in Iran. The surviving Armenian orphans and young girls were forced to convert to Islam. The girls and women who were raped and impregnated turned to wordless, silent slaves and maids. The Ottoman soldiers also killed the entire Armenian refugees of the genocide of 1894 and 1915, who, with a lot of difficulty, had arrived to Persia and were protected and taken care of by the Armenian community and the Iranian people. They were mostly young orphans, unarmed children, scared and grieving women, hungry and sick elderly. Don't you call this a double genocide? If the Turkish government does not like to recognize the massacre of 1915 genocide, then what would you like to name the massacre of 1918? That took place in a foreign country against the innocent people who never threatened the security of Turkey. They were not even Turkish citizens. They were unarmed men, women, children, and elderly. If this is not genocide, then what is it? Only Tabriz, the most important city of Azerbaijan in Iran, that had the largest Armenian population, was spared of the killings. The Ottoman army conducted itself in disciplined fashion and saw to it that law and order were maintained. The Ottoman troops always tried not to participate directly in the massacre, but rather sought to incite the tribes against the Christians and Muslims. The Turkish army was trying to attract and influence the local Muslims to join their forces. In addition, pan-Turkish propaganda was also at work in the region. In their posts it was written, "The principal objective of the Ottomans is to protect and come to the aid of our Muslim brothers." In reality, annexing the Iranian Azerbaijan to Turkey was one of their main plans. They did not achieve this dream, but later they created a new country in the north of Iran, calling it by the same name, Azerbaijan. But regardless of all these efforts to eliminate non-Muslims, the Iranian population helped the Armenians, Assyrians, and Christians. It is important to mention that many Muslim Iranians were also killed and suffered enormously during these invasions. Famine, epidemics, theft, pillage, and killings were present in all these cities and surrounding villages. In Tabriz, Ali Ehsan Pasha, the commander and bureau of this invasion, met Sarpazan Hayr Melik Tangyan, the prelate of Tabriz, who was a highly educated and devoted servant of Armenian church and people. By reading the following statement that he told to Sarpazan Hayr, we can imagine the degree of the evilness present in this individual. "I massacred the Armenian population of Khoy, Salmas, Urmia, and Maku. I have killed 500,000 of your co-religionists. Would you like a cup of tea?" What I learned by writing The Survivor is that historically, the massacre of the Armenians in Iran is very important. The simple story of a peace-loving grandmother has opened a sad but an important chapter in the history of Iran and the Armenian genocide, that till then not many historians were talking or writing about it. This book has opened up a new subject of research and discussion among Armenians, as well as Iranians and Turks. Every year, especially at this time of the year, I always see the same dream over and over. My grandfather looks very young and handsome. He's holding my grandmother's hand. It reminds me of their wedding day that I have described in my book. They walk happily together. My mother is a little girl of 3 years old. The three of them look very happy. They are walking in the garden that is covered with beautiful flowers. My mother runs after the colorful butterflies. He feels my anguish. He realizes that I have a worried, sad face. It seems he tries to comfort me and tells, "Don't worry for us. As you can see, we are fine and very safe here. No one can harm or separate us anymore. But let me ask you a question that I wonder about since I have been here. With the advance in technology and existing university history departments, so many research centers, and published books, existing photography, pictures, and museums, how is it possible, that there are still people who like to deny the genocide or Holocaust? What do you Urti people need more in order to accept the truth? Is it so difficult for people to confess and admit to their wrongdoings of the past? We are not asking for anything, but it will be nice to know that the new generation had advanced in humanity, that they are able to recognize the wrongdoing of their grandparents and the consequences of their past actions. I wake up, the sun has taken back his glory. Warm tears are washing my face. I'm talking loudly to my grandfather, to myself, and to anyone who likes to hear. Grandfather, I'm sorry to say that history repeats itself, and many do not change. You know, for years, many presidential candidates promised us that they will sign the recognition of the Armenian genocide if they were elected. So our community believed and voted for them. Unfortunately, once they occupied the Oval Office, they forgot all about their promises and the spoken words. We have experienced this during the candidacy of Mr. Clinton, Mr. Bush, and Mr. Obama. All my life, I never saw or had the opportunity to be with my grandfather. My mother never tasted the love of a father. My grandmother, a very young woman, had to live a sad, lonely life. I grew up without a large family circle. Different holidays, we invited friends and neighbors to our houses in order not to be lonely and sad. Frankly, I do not need the votes, signatures, or approvals of the politicians and heads of countries anymore. I do not need their approvals or denials of the Armenian genocide. I know the genocide existed. I know it happened in 1915 in Turkey, and then 3 years later in 1918 in Iran. I have lived with the sad faces of the survivors. I have experienced their psychological tortures. Since the publication of my books, I have received many pictures, testimonies, and mails. I have the proof of facts. For me, it doesn't matter what you call this: massacre, genocide, killings, cleansing. Call it what you wish, but please don't deny it. Because, God forbid, my grandfather thinks that anyone who denies the truth is simply ignorant of the facts and history. So this is Iran, and Khoy is there. You see, in the north, they have written Azerbaijan. At the time, this was all Iran one time. And by Qajar dynasty, they started giving gifts to, like Turkmenistan, they give it to Turkey, to Russia, and Azerbaijan also. And so these are the cities and villages that they have been, all Armenians have been. So in 1918 period, from even before, between British and Russians, there was a meeting in secret that they divided themselves, Iran, between themselves. So Russia was taking the north part, and British wanted this side of Iran because it was close to India, so they wanted to have access to India. But in neutral zone also, this part, British were present because that's where Iranian petroleum is. And right now you have the Iraqi border lines. So these are the pictures that, honestly, the book I have written in 1 month, and all these paintings I have done in 1 month only. This is the childhood, so my grandmother is sitting here playing. There's a board game that the children used to play, and that's her older brother. She was 12 and a half years old. The brother comes there kissing her and saying congratulations, because she asked why. They said because she's engaged already to Yeprem, which is my grandfather, and she's going to get married. So that's her two brothers, a brother and sister, that they all stayed alive, but the mother was killed. This is my grandmother's wedding. It's traditional wedding. I have painted in a way that you can see all the differences between rich people and poor people. There are many more here, and in Armenian tradition, normally the bride's dress and the musicians, the priests, they come with the groom and his family. So in front it's my grandfather and his father and mother and grandmother. And all these people in the paintings, they don't have faces because I don't know how they look. And in a way, when I painted like this, I want to present them for all the Armenians, not only my family. This is my grandfather. The only thing my grandmother talked about him was that he had a horse that danced when he was riding it. And so at the end of the book, you will say what happened also with both of them. This is my grandmother, my mother, and this is the painting I started because I wanted to have on the book cover, and I don't like horrors, so this is like, I wanted to show the blood, but I wasn't enough courageous to show the red blood, so it was kind of burgundy color. And honestly, when I did this side, I wanted to do symmetric that side, because Khoy is very famous to have beautiful flowers and water that runs in the city. When my brush went here, the first stroke was brown color. Then I got the message that this is good life going to bad life. But it happened by itself, so sometimes you are guided in arts. And the eyes is not God's eyes, but it's conscious eyes looking, saying, what are you doing? This is my grandfather. And so that's how it ends with his life. This is what my grandmother talked about, the only one time she told me, because when I pushed her, just before she dies, I was in Iran, I pushed her to tell me something. She said, what do you want me to say? Every night I hear that woman's voice in my ears, and her husband that had said only "ah," and he had died. She had seen this woman with her eyes when she was hiding in Dr. Eftekhar's house, that she was probably on term coming to Dr. Eftekhar to have her baby. And the two soldiers, they had really done so many horror things to her. And at the end, even she was just before dying saying, please keep my child. And they cut the child in two pieces, threw on her face, washed their house, just the hands near the water, and they left laughing. So I always think justice is only in the hands of God. That's why she has the cross asking. And one thing which is important here, I was painting, this is my last painting that I did. And while I was painting, I put a tree here. Then I said, no, she's dying. You can't have it. Three trees, the sign of life. And I said, I do clouds. While I was doing cloud, this part came out by itself. So I understood, because I believe even with my experience for near death, I think our spirits leaves our body before we die, really. And she's watching and telling God, what are they doing? This is when my mother, grandmother, and the peasant that took them to Tabriz, they are here in the mountains going to Tabriz. This is when they leave Khoy. And this is the gate of Bazaar, but at the same time the gate of Khoy. Here I had a picture. Inside there were people. I took people out because for us, till I didn't write the book, for me Khoy was a dead place. And this is why I just think when the Armenians were killed, the city also was killed in a way. So that's why it's empty, there's nobody there. But this gate is like 2,000 years old. These are the pictures. So Hakim Eftekhar kept my parents in his house, and I never knew about them. I never looked for them. After I wrote the book, there was a book on the name of, if you know Persian, it's called Tarikh Khoy. It's the history of Khoy. And the author is, unfortunately, he died after a year. I knew him. And Dr. Buyahi, and I asked him if he knows. I started talking to him every day and writing letters. I have a lot of letters from him. And I asked him if he knows Iftikhar family. He said, sure, the part I put about Khoy, his son has given me. So let's turn it. And these are the pictures. I became friends with them. Of course, Dr. Iftikhar had died, but his children became my friends, and we contact. And the amazing thing was that his older son, that you will see the picture, he told me for 90 years almost, I have always asked what happened to that pretty 3-year-old girl that we used to play in the yard. That was my mother. And they died 1 month apart from each other. When my mother died, I didn't tell him. I didn't want to hurt him. And he died exactly a month after. This is the grandfather of Hakim Iftikhar. They are from father to son, son to grandfather. Everybody is doctor. It's not. Of course, Dr. Iftikhar, he went to Europe, but they are mostly they practice on people and they become doctors, and their sons go with them visiting. Oh, I just see there's a doll here. That's amazing. And this is the father of Hakim Iftikhar. And as Khoy had very nice weather, especially in summer, most of the princes and crown princes will go there in summertime and hunting and having great time because it's a beautiful place, I have heard. I haven't been there. This is Hakim Iftikhar, the person who has, he's the reason that I'm here, I think. And when my book was, somebody called me and we visited each other. His mother was maid in there, or cook, I don't know, in his house. And his father was hiding there. And he said, like, can you imagine, it was a man of 85 years old when I met. He didn't know anything about his life because his mother had never talked to him, never said any word to him. So he thought by a story, because his mother was living in Iftikhar's house and his father was hidden there. So he thought, like, my mother and him, they can be brother and sisters. But I told him that my mother didn't have any siblings. He spoke many languages. My grandmother always said that Hakim Iftikhar had an Armenian wife, but none of the children accepted that their mother was Armenian. So still my translator and I are looking to see which wife was Armenian, but they don't want to say that one of them that their mother. But he spoke so good Armenian that he was secretary of Sarpazan Hayr Melik Tangyan. So we guess maybe his mother was the Armenian one. Okay, these are all pictures that I have received from friends, people who have read the book, people who have been in my lectures. They share, and I have at the end of the book my emails. So there have been really nice people to send me a lot of information that I will share with you. So this is the orphanage. This is what I call double genocide. All these kids were collected with this man, his brother, my grandfather, and some other people. They were collected in the desert, in the mountains, I don't know, anywhere. These are the children who were the leftover of genocide of 1894. And they brought them to Iran. And as you see here, that's Lepsus in young face. They told me they don't have a picture of Lepsus when he was young. I think he started his work here in Khoy, and then he became such a prominent person in Turkey. And that's another director and his wife. The interesting thing is that the director, this is done with Germans, the orphanage, Armenian community and German. And the Germans brought a lot of, this is the wife of the gentleman here, and the men were all killed. All these children were killed also. And the only one that stayed, she survived, and these three that are German. And the German man, he brought a lot of machinery and very modern things from Germany for the children to work woodworking. So they were learning a work, a profession, so they can practice in future. But unfortunately, none of them survived. And when the war started, it's amazing that, actually it's in the book of Dr. Riahi, that this man suddenly, who was the dean of the orphanage, suddenly he was in complete German army uniform with a lot of medals, and he ran to Iraq and disappeared. So during all that time, he was a spy. For what he was doing, we don't know. But apparently he was the head of the orphanage. Okay, that's again Mugerdich and his wife. He was killed. If you have read Armenian Reporter, his granddaughter was a reporter in Armenian Reporter paper. She came to interview me, and we became friends because I think still I can feel we have a blood that is working between us. And we couldn't find how. The only thing we could do maybe DNA. But we thought because when she read the book, she thought it's their story. So maybe my grandfather was a relative of them or cousin or something, but we have no way of proving. And unfortunately, she passed away. Before passing, she was trying to write the book, but she told me, "You wrote so well, I'm not going to write, but I will give you everything I have." So she gave me a lot of pictures that her mother has brought it from Iran. Her mother was a Protestant, so they had traveled more, and Americans took care of them, and they brought them to America. This is another Khoy school children that probably my grandmother went there 3 times a year, and my grandfather was involved in the educational system, so probably he knew the priest, which is here, and the teachers. This is Janet's mother and their children. This woman is a guest from Germany. So Germans were a lot present. It's amazing, all the history books you read, there is no word of Germans. They talk about a lot Americans, French, and British and Russian, but the Germans are very quiet in one side because they were working a lot with Turks. And the korsi is an Iranian way of getting warm. So you have coal underneath, which is warm, and people sit around, they eat there, they sleep there, and they receive their guests there. This is Mugerdich, Janet's grandfather, which was killed with his brother. We found this, I'm just doing a research with Janet's one of the cousins. And so this is a paper which is written in very old German. We had to find somebody to translate it to New German so we could translate it then to English. This woman had 3 children, 3 sons. So this is the son's daughter has sent me these pictures. He was 5, 6 years old when the Turks attacked Khoy. And so he was lost with his brother. They were lost in different sections. And the mother had the baby. They took the baby and threw in the river. She never recovered. She had lost her mind. Her son found him years after. He found his brother and his mother, and they took care of each other. And he was a grown-up Muslim, and he wanted to become Christian, back to Christianity. But unfortunately, in Iran, you can't convert to Christian. And he went to a priest in Tabriz. He asked him to convert him, and they didn't. And he said, because if he converts, the priest and the man will be killed. So he stayed Muslim, but when he died, he asked his children, his daughter, just to put his first name, Armenian name. He couldn't use his last name. And his daughter had like Islam Panah, that means the Muslim has protected them. And he wanted them to be very Armenian. So they were sent to Armenian schools, and they were discriminated because everybody would say, the Armenians would say, why are you in our school, you're Muslim? And they are very Armenian. And this is again he with his brother. This is the business that they built together. This is Dr. Lam. I just find this interesting because they sent me from Iran. My grandmother worked for him. He was a missionary in Iran, that he was a doctor, and my grandmother was she became almost like nurse working for him. And he asked at the end when they were leaving to go with his family to Italy, and my grandmother refused because she said, I'm not going to be separated from my brothers and sister. And that was the article that was written about him in Aliktert. The book was written in English, and then Dr. Eftekhar's, as I showed you, his son's wife's brother's daughter. She read the book, and Arusyak means the shining star in the, I don't know, the early morning. What do we call in English? I don't know the English name for that star. Anyway, that's the shiniest star, which is the last one in the morning. And Zohrab means the same thing in Iranian. So Zohrab and Arusyak are the same names. And she wanted to translate, so I said fine, and she did this. And this one, later, the person, they contacted me from Armenian newspaper, Alik, and they said they would like to translate. And the translator, after some months, he's telling me, I put my computer aside and I'm writing by hand. I said, are you crazy? I mean, the computer is great, why don't you do? He said, because your father was my teacher, and my father was famous to have a very nice handwriting. He said, so I want to prove my teacher that my handwriting is as good as his. So he did it, but then in Armenia, Professor Samuel Muradian, which is the Dean of Armenian language at Yerevan University, he did all the editing, which is wonderful. And then this one, Surpazan Hayr in Iran, in Tehran, last year he chose 5 books, so this was one of the books. And there are people who donated money. He printed it for centenary, and they had big ceremony opening. This one in Turkish, it was done by Armenian, the translation, but as I said, it was edited in Turkey, but they don't want to have the name. So I was asking the professor, I said, we have become very good friends. Actually, I will do some research with him. And I said, are you free in Turkey? Can you write? He said, oh yeah, we are free. I can teach anything I want at university. I can do research, anything I want, just the word genocide. If I do that, then I will go to prison. So I said, where is your freedom? And this one is being published.
Երեկոն ավարտվեց հարց եւ պատասխանով։ Նայում ես եւ մտածում, թե որքան նման են եղել բոլոր հայերի ճակատագրերը։ Գրեթե յուրաքանչյուրի ծնողների կամ մեծ ծնողների պատմությունը անցած նույն արհավիրքով եւ շատ քիչ վերապրածներից առաջացած սերունդներ։ Այստեղ հրահարչակ պատմությունների մեջ մի ուրախալի բան կա։ Դա այն է, որ երկրորդ եւ երրորդ սերունդները, որոնք ըստ էության պատմությունները գիտեն լսելով իրենց ծնողներից եւ մեծ ծնողներից, այնուամենայնիվ շարունակում են իրենց պայքարը անգամ 100 տարի անց եւ անգամ ժխտողական կեցվածք ամրագրած գերհզոր թուրքական քաղաքականությանը ծնկի բերելու պայմանով, որպեսզի ոչ մի ազգի հետ նման արհավիրք չլինի երբեք։ Իդեպ գիրքը վաճառվում է եւ ցանկացողները կարող են այցելել www.linkopublishing.com սայթը կամ հեռարձակնել հեղինակին 310 552 3518 հեռախոսահամարով։